Hello, I'm Michael Bailey, and the new season starts here. Welcome to the preview on the Athletic FC, where each week we'll be going deep on the biggest game of the weekend. This week, opening week, we're focusing on the ever-changing Chelsea, who host Premier League champions Manchester City on Sunday. And later in the show, we'll look ahead to the games featuring the teams from the club podcasts across our network. With me for a preview of Sunday's game at the Bridge is Tim Spears
Well, hey.
and John McKenzie.
Yo, yo.
Beautiful introductions, guys. Nailed that. Well done. Let's start with Chelsea, shall we? There's been yet more change at the club. New boss Enzo Maresca is the sixth to manage the side since Blueco acquired Chelsea in 2022. They've got a 43-man squad available for selection. So one or two dilemmas there. And they've won just once in pre-season. Tim, surely it's just going to be continued chaos for Chelsea from here, right?
I mean, it's hard to predict anything else, really. If you look at the amount of changes they've made and the inexperience of Maresca at this level and what they've done in pre-season, then yeah, all signs point to chaos, which is, great for us on podcasts like this, where we're just going to absolutely tear into them for the next 38 weeks or 38 matches. But yeah, I remember saying on the pod at the end of last year that, you know, after they got through that awful spell under Pochettino, they had a great run at the end of the season. They finally had some consistency. They only lost one game after February the 4th, which is away at Arsenal. They won their last five matches. And, it looked like he was sort of really building something there and turning things around finally. And it seemed like, look, some fine tuning in the summer and Chelsea can really do something next season. But instead, they've just ripped everything up. 5-year contract for Maresca, £180 million on 10 new signings. And yeah, and there's a lot to work on, in terms of this new style of football, this Guardiola style of football, which is what people are going to call it, of possession and very positional based game. It's going to take a long time, and in a post Euros summer, he hasn't had that time. So yeah, Leicester fans didn't like it even when they were top of the league. So he's got he's got a huge task ahead, and you'd have to instantly say he's favourite to be the first sack in this season because there's yeah, it looks like carnage.
I guess in a parallel universe, there's another one of these preview podcasts being done with Maurizio Pochettino still in charge of Chelsea, and the discussion would probably be very different. John, as we heard, Chelsea faced Manchester City during their US tour, found themselves 2-0 down inside 5 minutes, 4-0 down before the hour mark. I mean, I don't know how much we like to read into preseason, but surely this will be more competitive this weekend.
Yeah, and that wasn't the first team that they were 4-0 down against in the preseason tour because they were 4-0 down against Celtic as well, which is maybe even more worrying. But yeah, I mean, I know that's a turn of phrase, but expecting them to put up more of a fight is kind of interesting wording because I think the issues are less sort of physical and intense and more sort of probably cerebral because as Tim said, what's happening is that Enzo Maresca is attempting to implement a different type of football at Chelsea. We've just gone from Mauricio Pochettino, who, whilst I think a lot of people would think of him as a modern coach, it is a lot more direct. It is a lot more, I would say, South American almost than what we're going to get from Enzo Maresca. And that takes time. The first two goals that were mentioned there, 2-0 down in 5 minutes, both came from issues in build-up, problems in build-up where the ball was turned over too easily and City were able to pounce. So I guess the bigger question for me is like, are we going to see a Chelsea side coming out who are a little bit better organized, a little bit more able to build the ball up and introduce those patterns of play that Maresca will be using. But yeah, I think as time goes on through the season, this will become the question. Are you getting the upside from Maresca's approach that justifies his being brought in as manager? And I think the parallel, I suppose, is with Arsenal, who brought in Mikel Arteta, another previous coach under Pep Guardiola, and now look where things are at. And there's an extent to which that reality of Arteta becoming one of the best managers in the world has influenced a lot of clubs who think that, well, as long as we just stick with our manager and he has the same sorts of ideas as Pep Guardiola, then it's inevitable that eventually things will come good. And I'm not convinced that that's always the case.
I think he's one of the longest serving managers in English football now, isn't he, Mikel Arteta? Which I don't know
Potentially.
the last Chelsea manager that we could say that of. So probably a fair while ago. I mean, the interesting thing with Chelsea is they were really competitive against Manchester City last season. They were fabulous games, especially the one at Stamford Bridge, 4-4 thriller, and they also drew at the Etihad 1-1. So that there is quality in this squad, this huge squad, Tim. There is the quality to compete with the very best when they get it right.
Oh God, I mean, they've got 43 players, so you would hope that there is a bit of quality in there, and they
Well, they
spent,
can only play 11. They can only play
yeah.
11, of
But
course.
if you're going to spend, somewhere near £2 billion and have 43 players, then yeah, you're going to have players of individual brilliance. But that's not the issue at Chelsea. It's whether they can form a coherent team and actually do something noteworthy this season. And you look at teams around them who've strengthened sensibly, and you have to question whether Chelsea can even reach top four this season. And if they continue to miss out on the top four, there's got to be ramifications financially in the years to come, and there's got to be ramifications for what they're doing. There's no sort of justification for this kind of wild strategy that they've gone with over the past few years, just football manager style, spending so much money on so many players. I mean, is there an example of this working at any other club? Is this a blueprint from somewhere? Do you know what I mean? I just don't understand the strategy in
But
the
isn't the
slightest.
blueprint baseball, and that's kind of the problem, right? So these long contracts and trying to find value through picking up, I guess spreading value across long periods and stuff. And yeah, for me, the big question is, does that work so well in a sport where I think a lot of players they need to play a lot to develop, but they also have very short windows of a career, and so for me, I think it's quite a risky way of approaching things.
Cole Palmer has signed a new contract extension, so he's going to be tied down a little bit longer, and he's probably the one who can really hurt Manchester City. I guess that seems like an obvious question. Is there anyone else, Tim, that catches your eye going into this season that maybe we will see more of, or who could do some damage this weekend, especially?
I think Nkunku's the one coming into this season that's going to be a potential difference maker for them. Jackson. I thought Jackson rallied really well last season after a couple of poor months of some shocking misses in front of goal, and yeah, ended up with a decent tally. But Nkunku's the one, I think, and also Neto. Neto had a great couple of games against Man City last season. Pedro Neto, their new signing from Wolves, he's sort of terrorised City in the past. But yeah, the problem's going to be at the other end, right? I mean, they've conceded 13 goals in pre-season. They won one of six games. It's going to be really interesting with Chelsea. We're all kind of just pointing at them and saying you're mad, and this will never work. But yeah, their best 11 on paper is good enough for top four, just about. You look at the team they put out against Inter last week, and you add maybe Reece James and a couple of others into that. They have got a really good team, but it's as always with Chelsea, it's whether Maresca is going to be given the time and the patience to put it together, and history, suggests not.
The interesting thing, John, is that Enzo Maresca will have how he wants Chelsea to play, and then you've got how Maurizio Pochettino had them playing last season. What's the biggest work that's got to go in there to make those changes? And also, I find it very interesting that Maresca spoke during pre-season about this high line habit that they had, and that must take a good deal of work to knock those habits out of a team from their previous head coach.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between Maresca and Pochettino is probably the directness of what you'll see. So I think, and I think this is really important for ahead of this game, because I think in the 4-4 draw that we mentioned further above in the show, part of the reason why Chelsea were able to cause Man City so many problems is because they were able to hit City very aggressively on the break, particularly in wide channels. And that speed was what ultimately undid Man City. Whereas I think what's going to happen under Maresca is that we'll see similar to what we see with Pep Guardiola, which is much more patience in build-up. There's obviously upsides to both of those. If you can attack well with speed, you can cause teams problems. But the reason why Pep Guardiola doesn't really like doing that all the time is because if you attack with speed and you lose the ball can come back just as quickly. Whereas what coaches like Pep Guardiola and obviously Maresca following him will want to do is build up a little bit more slowly because it allows you to have your team in a structure that can absorb any of those turnovers if they happen. So yeah, I think that this means that this season Chelsea are going to go from being a team who could potentially cause City lots of problems to a team where they will cause City fewer problems because City are going to be doing the same thing as Chelsea, but they'll be doing it much better than Chelsea at this point because it takes time to actually bring that in. But yeah, we can talk about the out of possession stuff as well. I think, I mean, it's very easy for a coach, I think, when they come in at a new club to say all of the problems that you see now are the result of the guy before me, right? We saw that happening a fair bit with Jesse Marsch after Marcelo Bielsa moved on. And yeah, look, it is always difficult to implement a new approach. But I think what we've seen from Maresca so far, I think the issues are less with the high line and more with the fact that he's trying to get his team to play man to man quite aggressively across the field. And I think the combination of a high line and a team that are trying to play man for man is that if you get the man to man wrong and you have a high line, it's much easier for the opposition to just pop the ball over the top into the space that opens out. So yeah, I think that will be another thing that's worth watching out for because Man City will know exactly how to play against a team who are playing man for man. And if they can find the space in behind, then they have Erling Haaland running into that space. That could cause them a lot of problems as well. So, yeah, really not the best game week, I think, for Chelsea to come up against City. And I think as Maresca would be wanting a first 5 games more similar to Arne Slot, I think, who's got the easiest run of fixtures going into the first 5 games. But yeah, you've got to play City at some point. You're probably going to lose anyway. So hey, at least make it the first game of the season, and you can have the excuse that we're still learning our system.
Well, maybe Pep Guardiola will go easy on his former, assistant and mate. Maybe not former mate, current mate. Who knows? Anyway, over at the Athletic FC Tactics podcast, Michael Cox had this to say on how he thinks Enzo Maresca's style of play will be received.
I also slightly worry about Maresca and his style of play at Chelsea. I mean, Chelsea have had a few managers who have tried to play, inverted commas, good football. And in general, one, it hasn't gone that well. And two, the fans haven't really liked it. They didn't like Sarri's football. Villas-Boas's football wasn't very effective. Graham Potter had a difficult time. Pochettino, I think, kind of won round the fans towards the end of last season more than I expected. But Chelsea, they've had great success by being much more functional and much more pragmatic and more defensive than the other kind of big boys in the Premier League, and that was their identity. And I think the fans quite liked it. I think they thrived on being the party poopers almost and shifting towards an approach where, it's another manager from the same kind of school, if you like, as Guardiola and Arteta. I'm not sure that's going to be too popular. So, yeah, I think he's actually got a really difficult job on Maresca, especially this is a manager, he won a championship last year, but he's had no experience of top-level football. I mean, this is a big step up for him. I think it's a very difficult job.
And it will be interesting to see how he deals with it. I mean, it's interesting in a way, Tim. Chelsea have backed him. They've given him a 5-year deal, which I don't know if it's just out of habit that, there's a certain minimum length of contract these days at Stamford Bridge. But, 5 years suggests that they will want this to work and they are, going to give him time.
Oh, Michael Bailey. I think you know better than that.
I tried.
So it's been a while since a Chelsea manager lasted 5 years in the hot seats at Stamford Bridge. In fact, any guesses?
Oh my goodness, John.
I don't know. Has Frank Lampard got 5 seasons in total with his interim spells? All added up.
Yeah. But no, Dave Sexton, obviously, you're about to say, who managed 67 to 74.
Wow.
And then, like in recent years, Ranieri did almost 4 years, and then Mourinho did almost 3 just after him. But since then, it's 2 years at the very most, and you have to win a league title to justify getting a second season. So it's on that basis. I don't know, they're obviously under new ownership now, but it's almost impossible to see this guy lasting 5 years. And contracts mean less and less in terms of, I'm sure there are clauses inserted, whereas if Chelsea is 6th or 7th in the table at a certain time, they can maybe sack him for a lot less. There'll be all sorts of things inserted into that contract. But It's not just style of football that you kind of question whether he's the right man. I mean, he was very sort of I remember him being very sensitive at Leicester last year and sort of threatening to quit, didn't he? Sort of halfway through the season because he was annoyed at the criticism he was getting from supporters in terms of the style of football. You know, I looked at the Chelsea or the Premier League hopeometer the other day by the Athletic in terms of how optimistic fans are feeling ahead of new season. And yeah, Chelsea are rock bottom. So they're already kind of fearing the worst for this new season, Chelsea fans. Maybe that works in his favour in terms of expectations, but you don't feel like there's going to be a lot of patience there for him. He's also not really a yes man. Again, there was a couple of issues at Leicester behind the scenes. That doesn't really bode well for working at Chelsea. So yeah, I guess if we're trying to put a case for him lasting a season, you'd struggle, let alone 5 seasons.
Excellent. I mean, John, you spoke about how difficult the opening weekend is for Chelsea and Maresca. I mean, when would you expect to see positive signs as to it sort of clicking? When is the first fair point to say, okay, you like we can see it here?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. It's interesting hearing Michael talking about. He used the phrase, I think, inverted commas, good football. And I think it's interesting to term things in that way because I think there's a general consensus that, oh, if you're trying to play football like Guardiola, that's good football, right? But it doesn't always transpire that that football is good. And I think with me, the development of Maresca, as I'm looking at it, is how do you assess how good he is going to be compared to Guardiola? Because a lot of the time, I think people think that if you just put your players in the same parts of the pitch that Pep Guardiola puts his players, we talk about positional football, and you think, well, so we saw with Maresca with Leicester largely inverting his fullback inside into the middle, and that means you can push one of your players forward, and you end up with this box midfield. And a lot of people look at that kind of structure and they think, oh, he's inverting his fullback. That must mean he knows what he's doing, right? He must be playing advanced modern football. But for me, like playing positional play well is very different to just getting your players in the right positions. It's about manipulation of the opposition. It's about being able to consistently create free players between lines and find those free players and be able to progress the ball in sustainable ways. And then you have to be able to, once you've forced the opposition back, you then have to be able to break them down. And I guess that's what I'm looking for now, because if we look at Maresca in pre-season, we can see him doing that. He inverts his fullbacks. Sometimes they're pushing one of the fullbacks high and having one of the wide player on that side coming inside. Again, it's a different way to form a box midfield, but I see that style of play, and I'm like, you're not getting the actual advantages of this. It's positional play. I call it paint by numbers positional play, and the idea that you could buy like I guess a painting of the Mona Lisa, paint by numbers, and the idea is that as long as you get the colors in the right boxes, you're going to end up with the Mona Lisa at the end of it. But when one, that's not true, but two, that's not how art works, right? And so I guess what I'm looking for is evidence that he is not just a paint by numbers positional play coach, but a positional coach who actually has the ability to coach the principles into his players so that they can solve problems on the pitch as they go. And that's what Manchester City are so good at, is that even if the opposition's approach doesn't fit the plan that Guardiola's given them ahead of the game, they still have enough of those principles to be able to solve the problems as they're going. So yeah, that will take time. It does take time. We saw with Mikel Arteta that, again, maybe slightly different approach to Pep Guardiola, it's worth saying, but it took 4 seasons before that Arsenal team started looking well coached. And a lot of fans, I guess, like to use that as an example of why when their coach puts out a bad team, well, you just need to wait another 4 seasons. It could be Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. So that's the tricky thing that the Chelsea ownership are going to have to determine, right? Have we got a coach here who actually is improving our players, taking the sum of the parts of that team and making them better? But it will take time, and that's what I'm looking out for. I'm not looking out for, oh, has he inverted his fullback, or does this structure look like what Pep Guardiola does? I'm looking for, does the way that they are playing look like the players understand the system so well that they are constantly controlling games in every phase of play, and the opposition are more often than not struggling to have any sort of any way of being able to break them down back.
I tell you what I'm looking for, and that is a paint by numbers Mona Lisa at Shea Mackenzie. That's what I'm hoping. I want to see a picture of that next week. Not that Chelsea need any more signings, but we have asked Liam who from the Manchester City squad would start for Chelsea. And this is what he said.
Honestly, it might be quicker to list the players in City's strongest 11 that wouldn't start for Chelsea. Erling Haaland's the boring answer, but I'm not going to give you a boring answer. I'm going to give you an interesting one. And the City player who would most help Chelsea play Enzo Maresca's system, I would argue, is Ederson. Because when you look at what Maresca wants from his team, and in particular his goalkeeper, to move up into that defensive line in possession, to be a sweeper keeper, spending a lot of his time outside of his penalty area with and without the ball, to make decisions under pressure, and to be able to play consistently accurate passes, both short and long, although mostly short. Ederson's the best at that in the world, I think. And Chelsea do not have a clear answer in that position right now. So it would be Ederson for me.
Damning indictment there of the 6, 7, 8 goalkeepers in Chelsea's squad at the moment, Tim. That's an interesting choice, isn't it?
Yeah, but then they're not short in many positions, I guess you might say. I mean, you'd have to pick Rodri, right? If you're gonna pick anyone, that's the one I was thinking of.
Well, I'll let you race that with Liam later. Right, stay tuned. Later in the show, we'll hear.
I don't think you'd appreciate that if I just messed him out of the blue. Yeah, do you know what? Yeah, not sure I agree with that, mate.
It's all right. He listens. It's fine. Stay tuned. Later in the show, we'll hear which Chelsea player, brackets if any, I've got written here, Sam thinks would start for Manchester City. Okay, let's talk about the visitors. Not much has actually changed at Manchester City. Tim, does it feel a bit like we're approaching the end of an era? We've got Pep Guardiola and Kevin De Bruyne both into the last year of their current deals.
Yeah, it does feel like that's about to happen, and you know, it's going to be really interesting to see how the season plays out for City. I think the majority of people, if you were going to predict who would win the league today, you'd probably still say City. I think you'd certainly say they're still the team to beat. They've got, the best player from last season in Phil Foden. They've got the best player from the Euros in Rodri. They've got the top scorer in the league in Haaland. Got the best goalkeeper. So yeah, that they are absolutely the team to beat. However, things are going to happen this season behind the scenes. Guardiola's future is probably going to be sorted at some point this season, one way or the other. I think it's unlikely it'll be left to the end of the season. So that's going to be a huge soap opera. He's going to be asked about it every single week, and then he's either going to say Klopp style, I'm off. This is my last season, or he's going to sign a new contract. But either way, that's going to be a massive issue, which is definitely going to impact the team in some way. And then obviously you got the 115 charges, which is coming up, and that's going to be, God, if Pep's a soap opera, then what is that? That's like a huge trilogy blockbuster that's going to be coming throughout the season with massive consequences on not just Man City, but the rest of the league and the whole of English football. This is going to be huge. So of course that's going to impact the team. It's certainly going to impact the team if they get 70 points deducted. As I was reading on The Athletic this morning, the words 70 to 80 points deduction, they probably still wouldn't get relegated. But but yeah, what that punishment is and when it comes, if they're deducted points, if it's not many, does that sort of galvanize the players, give them a siege mentality like we've seen, Guardiola instill in them before? So I think, team wise, player wise, there are some issues there in terms of De Bruyne reaching the end of his career, but it's more the off field things that are going to impact City's season, I think.
I do wonder about Julian Alvarez leaving, John. I mean, that feels like there's a bit of a hole to fill, like the way he contributed last season at really important times. As we heard from Sam, Oscar Bob was kind of looking best placed to fill in that role, and he's broken his leg, which is such a sad and big shame on what could have been a real campaign for him. So that Alvarez hole, it feels quite big to me.
Yeah, I mean, Julian Alvarez has been used as a backup striker, but also as one of the eights in more recent seasons. I think that testifies to me more to the fact that City have never really replaced Ilkay Gundogan, and I suppose, yeah, that one of the big questions I've had is why you wouldn't do that, because it felt, when you have Gundogan and you're able to win the treble in that way, and then you lose him, and then you don't make any attempt to bring in some kind of player who's at least like for like. But in my head, like the players that they then have playing in the 8 slots are, you've got Kevin De Bruyne, you've got Foden, Bernardo Silva, and then yeah, as we've said, Julian Alvarez. None of those has felt like they had the same kind of influence on the game in and out of possession. And I think a lot of the time that we've seen those issues coming out last season, where it was a season where Man City were, despite the fact that the treble season they were behind for much of that time, they didn't really look super vulnerable. Whereas I think last season was the first time where it felt to me anyway that there was vulnerabilities in Man City that could be exploited. So yeah, I think whether or not City bring someone in, I suspect they probably will because it feels so obvious that they should. Especially when you make the amount of money that they made on Julian Alvarez. I think that's going to be very instructive as to how Man City are going to approach this season. But it feels very much like a transition season, right? It's in pre-season we've seen just tons of young players being used, and no doubt those players will go on to be excellent footballers. But yeah, throwing them in at the deep end, we saw Nico O'Reilly playing in the midfield for the Community Shield game, and Nico O'Reilly's a player who I've come to really like over the course of this preseason when I've watched him. But you could see from that game that he was being thrown in at the deep end to make your senior debut, and regardless of how much we can say the Community Shield isn't an important game, it's a big game to make your debut, and going to Wembley and being expected to sort of fill in a position where you might expect to see Rodri, although I guess Kovacic played a little bit deeper there. But you could tell that he wasn't at the pace. So we've talked about Oscar Bob, who was a player who's played a bit last season, started to look like he was getting to that level now where you could just see him being a rotation option. I think the idea was to use him and Savinho as the right-sided options. Now he's out of the picture, and so yeah, it feels like a very transitional season to me for Manchester City for whatever reason, and I think that makes it good for the Premier League because I think that we will have a title race this season. I've got Arsenal finishing top this season, and I think that will be good for the all round neutral fans of the Premier League.
We had a title race last season, John, as well. It's been incredibly exciting. I mean, one player missing from all of pre-season, you've already mentioned him as well, Tim, Rodri. Obviously, we saw what he did at the Euros. We've seen what he's done at Manchester City, but it is unlikely he'll be available on Sunday to face Chelsea. I mean, City did lose 3 out of their 4 Premier League games without Rodri in the side last season. So, I mean, do they rely on him? Is that one way to put it?
Yeah, I mean, rightly so, really. And he missed those few games in like the autumn, but otherwise, his injury record is very good. You're not going to have a like for like replacement as a backup because it's Rodri. He's amazing, and he's going to play most minutes. So yeah, you're not going to have a natural backup there. They certainly didn't have one in Calvin Phillips, but they do need a plan. We saw that last season. Guardiola sort of tried to replace him with like 2 or 3 players, basically. Didn't work. So it's a risk not to have a plan B because it's probably the most important area of the pitch for City. And, geez, he must be tired, right? He had a long season, which went all the way to July 14th, and now it's August 16th, and you're supposed to go again for another 9 months, and then the Club World Cup at the end of the season as well. So yeah, it's the football is never ending. But yeah, and as to your question, I wouldn't say an over-reliance because, like I said, his injury record is so good, but they're going to need a better plan B this season, and I don't think there's an obvious one in the squad.
It's interesting because it does feel like Arsenal there are fewer holes in the Arsenal squad and team almost than there are in this Manchester City group this time, which does make it an interesting dynamic. But we do have Erling Haaland, completely different situation to Rodri. He's just had a lovely time of it over the summer. No football gone on his holes. He's going to be fit, firing, ready, and I mean that Tim could be quite a scary prospect that from the first whistle he's going to be refreshed and he can take the thing by storm.
Yeah, and his pre-season form, certainly suggests that. And he had that weird spell last season where he sort of missed some easy chances and went on a barren run, by his standards. But he's absolutely guaranteed goals. If he starts 38 matches this season, he'll score 25 minimum. I think everyone would probably agree with that, which is astonishing numbers, and no one else in the league can match that. And it's an incredible asset to have, and that could ultimately be the difference between them and Arsenal win the title because, for all Arsenal's strengths and consistency, they don't have that. They don't have anyone who's going to score 25 goals, that I could see. But I guess the one thing you say about Haaland is, he's obviously reliant on service. And in that respect, a couple of players are going to have to step up here. De Bruyne is on the wane. He's 33 now. He's injury prone. He's not the player he was. Like I said earlier, he was talking about Saudi Arabia in the summer. Grealish, I think, had a good pre-season, but now he's got a knock. So who are the providers for Haaland this season? Oscar Bob kind of came to the fore in pre-season, but now he's injured. So you're looking at Bernardo Silva. You're looking at probably a bit more from Doku this season, who could probably do with refining his game a little bit and adding a bit more end product. They definitely need some more from Mateus Nunes, who kind of went under the radar last season, but had a really poor time of it whenever he, 50 million signings a tenner penny, as it were, for City. So nobody really, had a. He wasn't really under the spotlight for having such an ineffective season, but yeah, he needs to step up. And then you got Savinho, but he's only 20 and quite inexperienced. So yeah, I think there are questions to be asked there in terms of more the providers rather than Haaland. We know if he gets the service, he's going to score.
And John, we know that Pep likes to innovate and throw something out there that's kind of cute and new or a rehash or reworking, a bit like painting by numbers, I suppose, but without the numbers. I mean, John, have you seen anything in preseason that you think might intimate to something we might get that's a little bit different for Manchester City, or do you see a way they may evolve over the course of this year?
I think painting by numbers without the numbers is just art, Michael. So yeah, and look, he is a creative guy. He is so creative that for a mere oik like me to sit here and guess what he's going to do is very difficult. And almost exclusively, whenever I think, maybe he'll do this next season, he does something completely different. But he does always find a way. Obviously, in the treble-winning season, it was pushing John Stones up into midfield from centre back, which carried City through. I think I was thinking this season what we might see from Guardiola is, and we saw it a little bit last season, like a reliance on trying to use width and build up a little bit more, because what we've seen from City in previous seasons has always been trying to overload the midfield, trying to build up through the midfield, because if you can build up through the midfield, it's much easier to generate more dangerous chances. But I think oppositions now have become so good at blocking out the center of the field that it just becomes very, very difficult to do that. So if you start off with your build up with like a little bit more width, you can try and pull those narrow out of possession approaches apart and create the space that you can then exploit. So last season we saw Kyle Walker and Josko Gvardiol being used as almost roaming fullbacks, pushing forward in the traditional manner. And yeah, City are always going to be able to find ways of exploiting space and making those guys the free men. But I think the problem was that a lot of the time they were able to do that, and then they were like, "Oh, we've got Kyle Walker and Josko Gvardiol on the ball as our free men, and we're expecting them to be the guys who are then creating from there." And I wondered whether or not City would want to bring in some more kind of traditional fullback profiles, sort of your flying fullbacks who can overlap, get to bylines, and create from there. But we haven't seen that happen. So as I said, like clearly I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do think that we will start seeing that. Arsenal a good example, I think, last season that they weren't able to build up quite so consistently through the middle, so that we saw a lot of their build up coming in wide areas, and then interesting then that you see them bringing in eventually sort of Kai Havertz as a box striker, because you can then swing crosses in from wide areas to try and break teams down that way, and obviously have set pieces as well. So there's definitely things happening in terms of the world of tactical evolution, but whether or not I'll be able to guess what it is that Pep Guardiola is going to do, I would question. So. Yeah.
Well, don't worry, John. There's always next week. It's fine. I tell you what. We trailed it earlier. Let's hear from Sam on which Chelsea player he thinks would start for City.
I guess the obvious answer is Cole Palmer, but I also guess we're not going to be allowed that one. My other idea is Enzo Fernandez. Obviously, it's not worked out at Chelsea, but I feel like if he was at City, especially because they need someone in that kind of Rodri area, it would work perfectly. But it's not really a viable option either. So I'm kind of going to combine the two in terms of midfield signings and bringing the player back to City, who was already at City, and go with Romeo Lavia. I think not long after he left and Calvin Phillips signed, I think City realised that Lavia was far more ready to play the position as they want to play it. Knowing what we know now, not that it's going to happen, but if I could take one player from Chelsea, the cheat answer is probably one who was developed quite a lot at City, and it's Romeo Lavia.
There we go. Anyone have that on their bingo card?
No.
Shakes the head. John's smiling. Maybe he did.
No, I think Lavia's had a really good pre-season. And that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Or I guess it's a few more million than simply one. But how do you back up Rodri, as we talked about before? And when you see a player like Lavia being able to do the stuff that Rodri does, I think it does raise questions about why they let him go. I think Enzo Fernandez is a great shout as well. We're talking before about the left 8 slot, where it feels as though City haven't really had that kind of profile of player like Enzo. I think that he would go a long way towards solving some of the problems in possession, maybe cause some more out of possession. But I think, I think both of those picks by Sam were prescient.
Well said, John. Well, after our significant deep dives and discussion, it's time to bring it back to the rudimentary function of a preview, and that is, of course, predicting what will happen. Which is, I know you guys love this bit. I know all last season you were big fans, and I guess this is the first effort of the new season. So, Tim, you can go first. What do you think is going to happen at Stamford Bridge?
I feel like it's a good time to play City because they haven't got everyone back yet and they start up slowly. But then it's a good time to play Chelsea because they're in awful form and right at the start in terms of pre-season results and right at the start of a project. So yeah, in that respect, you might expect a bit of a high scorer because neither team are set up as they're going to be in a few weeks' time. So like 2-2 maybe.
Ooh, ooh, lovely stuff, John.
Yeah, I think I'll probably err on the side of City, but I'll go 2-1, 2-1 to City.
I was going to go because I'm assuming I'm allowed to predict. I was going to suggest a 1-0 Manchester City win and Pep Guardiola being very complimentary about Enzo Maresca in the full-time discussions. And there we are, job done. Let's move on, shall we, to take a look at some of the other games previewed across the Athletic FC Network Club podcasts. In our Manchester United pod, Talk of the Devils, host Ian Irving asked Laurie Whitwell, Carl Anker, and first Andy Mitten how optimistic they were feeling about United's chances this season.
New signings, get everyone going, yeah, bring on the season. That can be punctured very easily. I think United will have to work very hard to finish in the top 4.
Carl?
I think I agree with Andy. United need to work really hard to finish in the top 4. Not just because of how many things went wrong last season, but also because I do think a number of United's rivals for those positions are pretty good. And this is the difficult thing. It's not a top 4 race. You're fighting for 3 and 4 because, unfortunately, them lot cross the road and them lot in North London are very, very good right now.
Laurie?
It feels like there is certainly renewed energy and an intention to do stuff that there just wasn't under the Glazers.
United kick off the Premier League season at home to Fulham on Friday night. Any burning thoughts on that one, John?
Yeah, I mean, this is very much a game that Manchester United could lose, right? Did Manchester United lose to Fulham last season? I don't know. It feels like they lost to everyone at some point or another.
I think you're right.
And I think it's there's been a lot said about Manchester United this summer, and I think there's a lot of positivity around the club amongst their fans. So it's going to be fascinating to see whether or not that translates onto the pitch. I've got Manchester United 6th on my prediction table, which caused a lot of fans some consternation. But I mean, they finished 8th last season.
Why? Yeah, that's what's
the underlying number. The underlying numbers had them 14th, so I thought that was a step up. I thought I was being positive.
I think you've been pretty generous, to be honest.
Yes. Well, yeah.
This is. So I was going to say, this is the one game Erik ten Hag should savour this. It's the one game where he's not going to be under pressure for his job. One game. I can't remember the last time we didn't talk about a Man United game and say, oh, is Ten Hag going to get the sack this week? It's been about a year now. So yeah, he can enjoy this one, and then when they lose, he can start fearing about getting the sack again. I do find it crazy how everybody's kind of wondering how Man United are going to get on this season and just talking about how the signings are going to do. What about the manager? He was atrocious last season. He had this incredible fragility, the worst Premier League finish for 34 years. some of the things he did were farcical. I'm amazed he's kept his job, to be honest. And yeah, I think it's going to be a discussion topic again pretty soon because yeah, they've got some issues.
But Tim, they won the FA Cup.
Doesn't
Oh,
matter.
no, let's not have this discussion now. Shall we got all season for that? Right. Meanwhile, on our Spurs pod view from the lane, Jack Pitbrook reveals Spurs' biggest weakness this season.
There's quite a few question marks about the team, particularly in the second half of last season. And I think this is maybe the biggest one, or one of the biggest ones, is that we all know the set-piece defending, particularly in the second half of last season, was very bad. And this is an area where Tottenham fans will want to see a big improvement this season. And, you know, the jury's out. We've got to wait and see.
What's the result going to be, Jack?
2-2.
Ooh. Any set-piece goals conceded by Spurs?
Yeah, 2.
Tottenham head to Enzo Maresca's former club Leicester, who returned to the top flight as championship champions on Monday. Spurs, this will be I think this will be fascinating, Tim. Spurs second season under Ange Postecoglou.
Yeah, it will be. I naturally kind of think positively about them and think, especially with the Solanke signing, that they're going to improve. But there are so many questions that were being asked towards the end of last season. It's whether he's managed to fix them. You know, they had, as Jack said, the ridiculous thing with set-piece goals, but also people forget James Maddison's form absolutely fell off a cliff. They haven't sorted out their number 6 issue either in midfield. Obviously, he's Basuma's suspended now on Monday. So yeah, they need more goals for what they are. I think they were a very attacking team, and we enjoyed watching them last season. But they were only 7th top scorers, and they needed a tighter defence as well. They conceded a lot last year. So yeah, there's a lot of issues to sort out. But I am optimistic for them. I think if they can improve on their injury record in particular, Van der Ven and Romero as a back two with sort of a Doggy and Porro either side is a pretty good defence. And yeah, there's Solanke's a great addition. I'm pleased to see him get a good chance, and I think he'll take it.
What do you reckon, John?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like it's amazing the palliative effect the summer can have, because both of the teams we've just talked about, Manchester United and Spurs, like were in, you know, at times last season in dire straits, and now we've had a summer, and everyone sort of seems to just be positive now about these teams. Everything's going to go well now from here on in. But yeah, I think that the worry for me is maybe less so set pieces now that PGMOL, Pogmol, have changed seemingly changed the rules on holding for set pieces, so that could play into Spurs' favour. But watching their pre-season games, I still have massive questions about the way that they defend. I think it's fine if you're, as Tim says, if you're scoring loads of goals, you can try and outscore the opponent. But I think when you get to the Premier League and you have some of the defensive weaknesses that they have, and defensive weaknesses through their own choice, so pressing up in certain scenarios where they just leave themselves exposed, those scenarios just get punished by teams in the Premier League. So yeah, again, I think it'll be a really exciting season. But for me, the big question is whether or not they can maybe introduce a little bit more pragmatism into some of the decisions they make without the ball, to be able to give them a platform to really work with what they can do on the ball, which is fantastic. And yeah, echo what Tim's saying about Solanke. I think it feels like a great move for him, and it feels like a great move for Spurs. And I'm looking forward to seeing that play out.
Brilliant stuff. Liverpool are at another promoted club, Ipswich Town. That's in Saturday's early kickoff, which feels like one last nod to Jurgen Klopp, that one. On our Liverpool pod walk-on, Cy Hughes had this to say on his expectations under Arne Slot this season.
For me, I don't want to use that sort of description of transition, but I think it's fair to expect that it's going to be a slightly different team. It's going to take a bit of time for the players to absorb the ideas that he wants, because it just won't happen overnight. But if Liverpool can certainly be in the top 4 and do well in Europe, it'd represent a good season. If they challenge for the title, I think it'd be an excellent season. And if he could win the title, it'd be an outstanding season. So that's how I see it.
This is a really interesting one, because I guess we have all the newly promoted optimism and enthusiasm of Ipswich against, well, Arne Slot's sizable challenge of following Jurgen Klopp. John?
Yeah, I think this is going to be fun. We mentioned earlier in the show that Liverpool have a really nice run in terms of on paper easy fixtures. So I think Arne Slot will be given the time to just sort of get Liverpool playing quite well. They'll probably be pretty high on the league table after 5 games, I suspect. But yeah, it's it's going to be fascinating to see what he can do with Liverpool. I mentioned in a tweet recently that I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get the chance to see Roberto De Zerbi at an elite side. But I think the closest approximation we're going to get is Arne Slot, actually. I think a lot of the ideas that he implements from a tactical point of view are similar to what you get with De Zerbi. And so I'm looking forward to lots of deep build-up, lots of intricate build-up, and then creating the space that you can then have players running into. So we'll see lots of patient build-up and then lots of really exciting, high-tempo, sort of artificial transitions where, yeah, we'll see, players like Salah running in behind. We might get to see Darwin Núñez in full flow in that kind of system, and no doubt he'll get some massive chances to miss as well. So yeah, I think I'm excited to see Liverpool. It's always great to have a different style of play at a big club. It's also really exciting when that's happening after 8 seasons of one of the greatest managers who's ever lived. So yeah, Liverpool really set up to be a fun watch this season, I think.
But isn't it a bit weird that they haven't signed any players though? Do you know what I mean for this new style?
I think they'll be okay. I mean, interestingly enough, like the players that they brought in last summer in the central midfield area, all the conversations were like, why they not brought like this sort of like physical profile number 6 like Rodri. And I think, you can kind of get away with it when you're playing a double pivot. They'll play a double pivot. There'll be 2 of them. There's questions about whether or not, which of their players that they signed suits that double pivot best. And there's obvious reasons why they wanted to bring in Martin Zubamendi, because he's, the sort of brilliant kind of high tempo build-up player that you want in that kind of double pivot. But I don't think the problems that Liverpool had under Klopp in terms of how do you defend those big spaces are going to be as prevalent under Slot, but just because they're going to have 2 players in that area for most of the time. So yeah, I think they will need to make some signings to be better, but I think that they'll be fine with the players they've got now. In a way that I think, maybe we just have got into our head that all big clubs have to make loads of signings in the summer. But it would be nice to see Liverpool, I think, do well with a squad that doesn't have a huge amount of work done to it.
And finally, on our Arsenal pod handbrake off, James Nicholas predicts who will be a starter for Arsenal by the end of the season.
Ben White's just unsubscribed.
I know, that's it. I was thinking I'm going to get a load of phone calls.
Can I just say, there was absolutely no chance that Ben White is listening to a football podcast.
That's true, right? Yeah.
I think you'll be all right.
We're safe with that. Let me revise my prediction slightly. I think Jurriën Timber will be a starting individual in that back 4.
All right.
I don't think it's necessarily that Ben White is vulnerable. I think that Jurriën Timber will play himself into that first choice back 4. But I wouldn't be able to say at the expense of who necessarily.
For Arsenal, it's a visit from Tim Spears, Wolverhampton Wanderers, at the ungodly time of 3 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon.
I got all excited there and started flapping around on my screen.
Well, exactly. So you should. There'll be that's a challenge for Wolves, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah. Not really looking forward to that one from a Wolves point of view, but from Arsenal's point of view, really excited to see if they can sort of kick on again this season. They've improved their points tally for 5 seasons in a row. If they do that again, I think they'll probably win the league. They've got the best defense for my money in the league. And they added 2 players to that effectively this summer with Timber and Calafiori. So yeah, I think the only question mark over Arsenal is do they have one of the top 3 keepers in the league? I'm not sure they do. You probably need that to win the league. And are they going to rely on Havertz as a number 9? And can he get anywhere near sort of 20 goals? Because I think that's the only thing. I know they scored 91 last season, so it's kind of feels a bit silly to say that they need someone who can score more goals. But you know what I mean? In sort of tight 0-0s, when teams like Wolves come and sit back and try and frustrate them, you do need someone prolific who's going to get you sort of 20 goals a season. But they don't have that. But apart from that, they're almost there, aren't they? They're almost there. They're definitely going to challenge City this season, and it's their best chance of winning it for me.
Okay, it's time for some trivia now. We thought we'd throw some of this in around the key game coming up. See if you can get these to John and Tim, but obviously everyone listening, see if you can get there before I read out the answers or these guys get there. So first up, in May 2021, Chelsea took a 23-man squad to Porto, where they beat Man City 1-0 in the Champions League final. That is a sentence that feels like from a very long time ago. How many of those 23 players are still at Chelsea, and can you name them?
Oh, blimey.
Reece James. Was he around then?
Yes, he was. John has one.
And
Well
Ben
done.
Chilwell, I guess, on the other
Well, John's got 2. Lovely work.
Is that it?
side.
That's 2.
Oh.
How many?
Do they technically still have Conor Gallagher?
Well, he's not on my list, so I'm going to say no.
What do you mean? No, come on.
I'm guessing
he
as
was
the first
definitely
team player.
Oh no, he wasn't. Yeah, okay,
First team player. Let's say that.
I think that's it. I think if we're going to stick or twist, I think we're going to. As in because we're a team
there's one
here.
more player who we're
John.
just completely forgetting about here.
John is correct in that there is one more player that you are just completely forgetting about.
Yeah,
No,
I can't
think of it.
It's a goalkeeper.
I thought goalkeeper, but then they've surely got rid of Kepa and.
He's
Mendy.
still there.
Is it Mendy?
Is he
still there?
Still contracted? Is he?
He's still there. Although I did have to check that myself. Well done. We got there in the end. Good job. Here's the second one. Until the season just gone, the last time both Premier League games between Chelsea and Man City ended in a draw was back in 2015. Can you remember which ex-Chelsea players scored an 85th minute equaliser for City at the Etihad?
Sorry, it was an ex. Did you say ex-Chelsea?
Ex-Chelsea player scored for Manchester City. It was the equaliser in the 85th minute at the Etihad. Silence.
It's not Kevin De Bruyne, is it?
It's not. You're right. It's not. But I do distinctly remember them not celebrating.
Oh, it's Frank Lampard.
It is. Well done, Timothy. Good job. That feels like an ideal place to end. Thank you so much to all of our guests today, but especially the esteemed Tim Smears and John Mackenzie. Make sure you tune in to the Athletic FC podcast on Monday. And in the meantime, have a great weekend.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search the Athletic FC wherever you get your podcast from.